In the last class, we were discussing some very important aspects of the tradition of yoga. We already discussed this topic. Shankaracharya writes in his commentary, at the beginning of his commentary on the Gita. And remember, many of you may already know, we are reading Bhagavad Gita today because Shankaracharya wrote a commentary on this book in the 8th century. You'll be surprised to know that before he wrote this commentary, nobody used to take Gita seriously. In fact, there are no less than 18 poetical works spread over the ancient Sanskrit classics, Mahabharata, Bhagavad, and so on. No less than 18 poetical works which are called Gitas. Gita means a song. Sometimes they are in the form of a dialogue between philosophers, sages, philosopher kings, wise men, ascetics. Sometimes in the form of dialogues between wanderers and pilgrims. But this book became such an important world-renowned classic because Shankaracharya wrote a commentary on these 700 verses, which is a very small, a tiny fraction of Mahabharata, which contains more than 100,000 verses. And this commentary brought out the hidden philosophical implications of this great classic. So, he makes a statement at the very beginning of his commentary. He says, there are two human types, two trends in cultures, in civilizations, also in individual character. The one is the contemplative type, the other is the active type, what we may call psychology, extrovert and introvert. That is the old tradition. So, those who are not necessarily individuals, cultures and civilizations also are given to more contemplation and contemplative way of life. In their culture or in their character, contemplation will be the dominant trait. And those who are of an active type, work, enthusiasm, organizational efficiency, and a genius for conquering external nature and acquiring knowledge to manipulate the forces of external nature and to use that knowledge for increasing the physical comforts of life. These are two types. The one type is called the yoga in this section. Here it means karma yoga. The other is called Sankhya, the jnana type. So there are two terms used at the very beginning of the 5th chapter. Sankhya yoga pradhadbhala pravadantina pantitaha. Lord Krishna says, ekamapyastita samyag ubhayoga vindade phalam. This is the verse. Sankhya means the path of philosophical analysis. See, we sometimes, when we think seriously as to what is the meaning of life, what am I, what is the implication of life, what is the goal of human life, is there any eternal everlasting value in this world? Is there something beyond the present, beyond the empirical enjoyments? This is the path of jnanam or sankhya. It's called Sankhya. Here doesn't mean the philosophy of Sankhya. That should be very clearly understood. So, the word Sankhya is used here in the 2nd chapter. In the 2nd chapter and also in the 5th chapter here. Here, Sankhya means the path of knowledge. Yoga means the path of action. Here, the path of action doesn't mean exclusively a path of action. Action combined with contemplation. That is yoga, and exclusive contemplation is the path of jnana or the path of knowledge. Lord Krishna says, The path of knowledge requires total renunciation. Renunciation of all activities, social obligations. This is not for all people. If people who are psychologically unfit to practice renunciation, if they do try to practice renunciation, you will find they will, even in the practice of renunciation, they will be extremely active, hyperactive, ambitious. So there is a contradiction, in fact. So those who cannot completely control the senses, those who cannot go beyond the empirical realm, cannot and should not try to practice the path of exclusive contemplation. And for such ordinary spiritual seekers, the best path is the path of action combined with contemplation, both coming together. So in this sixth verse, Lord Krishna makes this point clear. Sannyasastu mahabaho dukkham aptum ayogataha yoga yukto munir brahma na chirena dhigachati. So renunciation of action is very difficult for one who has not already gone through the path of action. I shall explain this. I already explained the last chapter, last session. Normally, human beings are active. Even if you try to remain inactive and sit in an easy chair, and we sometimes contemplate, even at that time, our mind will be active. Mind will be imagining, mind will be speculating. So that is a kind of intellectual or mental action. Physically we may remain inactive, but mentally we will be hyperactive. So this active nature, this natural instinct of our senses and mind to be active should be first of all sublimated, refined by diverting their energy and their movements into a creative channel. So the first step for any spiritual seeker is to do good things. Physically doing good things, mentally doing good things, good imagination, good thoughts, good ideas, and also good actions. Because through this process, our mind and senses get refined, purified, they get sublimated. Otherwise, what happens? If we do not give a positive direction to our senses of action and mind, they will naturally move in the opposite, in undesirable direction, which will be very detrimental to spiritual life. Therefore, to avoid that problem, first we must give a spiritual orientation to our senses, as I already explained in the last class. A tendency to read books is very healthy. So that tendency should be diverted towards reading books which supply the mind with positive, creative, constructive ideas. Otherwise, the tendency to read books may fill the mind with poisonous food, unhygienic food. So that just as poisonous food makes the body sick, poisonous ideas will make the mind sick. So mind becomes healthy. And that mind will naturally divert itself towards creative channels. So that's the first step. Instead of doing that, if all of a sudden, if we try to practice inaction in the name of spiritual contemplation, it will be not only non-creative, it could even be dangerous. So, in fact, Lord Krishna, with a very, very, very interesting, a very strong psychological insight, gives a warning to his disciple. The meaning is this: Na buddhi vedam janiyet ajnanam karma sanginam joshiyet sarva karmani vidwan yukta samacharet. This verse comes elsewhere. So the meaning is this: a person who is normally very ambitious, very active, who are efficient, who may be well organized, who always work with a definite motive. You ask him, well, tomorrow onwards, you try to do work without any motive. We know what really happens. If it takes your advice seriously, and if he really if he makes an effort to practice that, there will be vacuum in his mind. Because you are habituated to doing things with a definite plan, scheme, a well-organized plan. You plan everything, you do efficiently. So there is always a plan in our mind, and a scheme. And we try to work out that plan in our action. Now suddenly, if a person tries to practice action without any plan, without any motive, without any selfish motive, what really happens is that person sometimes may become a hypocrite, or he may become totally inactive. Most people won't take seriously, of course. If an ambitious person who is naturally efficient, who may be a businessman or an executive who has to work very efficiently with a definite plan, he knows very well that without a definite plan, nothing could be done effectively. And if he tries to do that, he knows that he won't succeed. So he won't take it seriously. But suppose a gullible man takes it seriously and tries to practice, what happens? The vacuum will be created. The reason is his mind is not ready to practice the highest karma yoga. So Krishna gives a warning, don't try to force a person who is unfit to practice disinterested action to practice karma yoga. It will be very dangerous. So that's why great spiritual seekers will give you an advice which you can practice. They won't give only that much of spirituality. So the exact dose, a doctor knows how much of medicine should be administered to a patient. Similarly, all great spiritual teachers will give the exact dose of spirituality. I can give an example, a classic example in the life of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, you find. One of his disciples was a questionable character. He was a great genius, he was a playwright, he was a dramatist, and he owned a very big theatre in Kolkata. But he was a profligate, a habitual drunkard. Now, this man came to Sri Ramakrishna, and he also wanted to practice spirituality, he also wanted to do something to get God realization. Now, he had a desire to quit his habit of alcoholism. But Sri Ramakrishna knew very well that it's not easy for him. But he had one strong point. If he cannot do something, he will say, well, I can't do that. I don't agree with you. This good quality, this integrity he had. So, Sri Ramakrishna told him, every day morning, before you start your work, you take the name of God, morning and evening. Now, this man was a drunkard. He himself can't say when he will go to sleep and when he will get up. See, there are two types of people who are beyond time. The greatest spiritually elevated souls who are always living in a state of infinity. They don't live in time, they live in infinitude. There is an ancient verse in the Rigveda Samhita, Antaya Bahuvadinam Anantaya Mukam. The language of the infinite is silent, so it cannot explain. So people who live in infinitude or infinity, those who transcend time, are the highest spiritually elevated souls, spiritually illumined souls. The great spiritual personalities the world has produced, they could always think of God or think of some higher spiritual value. So they were living in the world of high spiritual ideas. So they transcended time. Most people live within time. Time means the artificial 3 lines of three artificial lines, past, present and future. That is what is relativity, that is time. Then there is another class of people who also don't live within time. But they go beyond time, not by transcending time, because, as I said, habitual drunkards always live in a kind of total oblivion. So this man was like that. So he said very clearly, I can't take the name of God or think of God. He said he's a drunkard. And he said very clearly, then at least once a day, he can't say, well, I can't give you a word. I can't do that. Well, then Sri Ramakrishna said, well, in that case, can you accept me totally? Can you give me the whole responsibility for your spiritual life? He was willing to do that. He did not really understand what it really implied. Anyway, he agreed. But from that moment onwards, this man, who was a habitual drunkard, found it physically impossible to take alcoholic drinks. So whenever he started taking bottle or glass, immediately the picture of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa will flash in his mind, and he'll stop. He would throw away the bottle or glass, whatever it is. So this man became a great saint in course of time. So the idea is, Sri Ramakrishna knew that if he had ever told him, "Never, you stop drinking tomorrow onwards, you start practicing asceticism, you start reading holy scriptures," Sri Ramakrishna knew very well that Girichandra Ghosh, that was the name of this playwright, won't take it seriously. He would not. He won't be able to practice it. So Sri Ramakrishna gave him as much of spiritual instruction as he could digest. So Lord Krishna says, for the ordinary spiritual seekers, the best path is to practice action with contemplation. And through this process, our natural instinct for action, our natural ideas, our desires will be sublimated. There is a very important lesson in some of the spiritual classics, sublimation of desire. It's a sublimation of interests. All of us have got interests. If somebody tells you, well, I cannot do certain things, it only means, in most cases, that that person has no interest in doing that. If somebody tells, well, I cannot meditate or I cannot read good books, it means there are some books which he is reading which may not be good. So he has interest in certain things. He has desire to read certain things, which he reads. So what is required at the beginning is sublimation, refinement of our interests, our desires. If we can sublimate our desires to a higher level, that is the first step in spiritual life. So, and he says, if a person practices this sublimation of interests and sublimation of our mental focus, gradually we will be able to graduate and evolve to a higher level of spiritual life. A very interesting example, a classical example, is given in one of the spiritual classics of Vedanta, Vaishnava system. It's called Bhagavad Purana, a very ancient work. There is the story of a great sage. He gives some insights from his own spiritual life. How he learned his lessons from nature. Because for a true spiritual seeker, the whole nature becomes an open book. Nature itself becomes a great teacher. If you observe the world, different living beings, the external natural phenomena, we can learn a number of lessons. But before doing that, we must train our mind to learn the right kind of lessons from nature. Anyhow, a few examples I can give here. He speaks of 24 great spiritual teachers. And mind you, his teachers were not all great saints and sages. Some of them were animals, some of them were birds, some of them were taken from natural phenomena. For example, he says earth. That sage says, he thought about the earths, the mother earth. And if we observe how the earth responds to human action, to life in nature, you find one of the most predominant characteristics of Mother Earth is complete patience and forbearance. We violate Mother Earth. It's called, ecological disaster, ecological problems. Human beings inhabit on this earth, and through deforestation, we do great violence against Mother Earth. We construct dams to block the flow of rivers, the natural flow of rivers, water in rivers. So, all scientific inventions sometimes are used to violate the invisible equilibrium of environment and nature. Still, the earth doesn't revolt. Sometimes it is interpreted in a different way. Earth does revolt. If you destroy all the forest, then there will be deforestation, there will be no rains, and there will be famine, and there will be ecological and natural disasters, of course. But then this sage says, when I observed how the earth responds to human activities, he said, earth is a great teacher of the value of forbearance and patience. So his Mother Earth becomes a teacher. And then air. Air flows. Air can bring you good smell and bad smell. But the air itself remains unattached. The sky, the vast sky. Skies sometimes will be clouded, dark in color. Sometimes will be bright, but the sky remains unattached. So many of these natural phenomena will teach us the great lesson of forbearance, patience, unattachment, and many other spiritual lessons. Then the sage gives another example. He gives the example of pigeon. It's a the way we get trapped into bondage, that the example is given. This sage narrates a story that he himself once noticed. Once he saw that a hunter had prepared a snare, a trap, and some of the tiny pigeons were caught in that trap. And when the mother pigeon came, it could not bear the sight of its own children being caught by the hunter. It jumped itself into the net. Then the father pigeon and the whole group of these birds came and jumped into the net. Now the sage says their attachment to their children caught them within the trap. So a number of lessons are given like this here. One interesting lesson that the sage refers to is very striking. He says one day he was sitting in a forest road. So an arrow, one blacksmith was sharpening an arrow with great concentration. A marriage procession was moving nearby. This man who was sharpening the arrow never looked in that direction, the huge procession that was moving. From that he learned the lesson of concentration. So he observed different creatures: earth, air, sky, fire, sun, pigeon, then python, sea, moth, elephant, fish, moon, honeybees, and so on. All these natural phenomena taught him one lesson or other, some important spiritual lessons. He says, if we constantly feed our mind with good thoughts and enrich our tendencies with good actions, then mind will develop a faculty to learn good lessons from nature itself. That is a lesson that he gives in this interesting story. Now we'll go to the next verse, 7th verse, which I'm dealing with now. The 7th verse says, Yoga yukto vishuddhatma vijidatma jidendriyaha sarva bhudatma bhudatma kurvannapi nalipyade. It's a famous verse. When our mind is purified by devotion, great concentration at the time of performing our duties and responsibilities, at the same time, if we could put our mind above body consciousness and sense organs, and when we realize that we are something above and beyond body and senses and mind, then we can always remain active. Still, we will not be touched, we will not be affected by action. So the method of practice of yoga is very clearly mentioned here. This verse is sometimes interpreted to be a commentary on an earlier Vedic statement which comes in the Yajurveda. There are 2 verses in a small Upanishads that I will just quote. 2 verses in the Ishavasya Upanishad, the smallest of the Upanishads. Ishavasya vidam sarvam yat kinja jagatyam jagat tena tyaktena bunjidhaha ma gridakasya siddhanam kurvanneva iha karmani jije visheshatam samaha evam toyena anyate dosti na karma lipyade nare. There are 2 important verses which, according to Mahatma Gandhi, contains all the lessons of Karma Yoga. Gandhi once said that if all other holy scriptures become extinct, disappear from the face of earth, and if this Upanishad alone remains, and if these 2 verses alone remain, that they will be enough to guide humanity along the path of spiritual life, according to Gandhi. The meaning of these two verses is simple. I shall try to explain. Because if we can understand the implications of those 2 verses, this 7th verse of the Gita, 5th chapter, will become very obvious. The first verse, the Upanishad says, the whole creation, the entire universe is pervaded by God or by the divine spirits. Everything is pervaded by the immanent reality, Atman, of the divine spirit. Now, in that case, how do we live in this world? That's the next question. If somebody tells you the earth, the mountains and valleys, all living beings, the money that we accumulate in banks, the work we do, if everything is an expression of the divine, then how do we interpret our daily life? We have to live in this world, do our duties, perform our responsibilities. How do we do that? So, the Upanishad says, we can enjoy everything in this world. But at the back of our mind, we must keep this idea. These things can be enjoyed not through enjoyment, but through renunciation. How do we enjoy things through renunciation? Apparently there's a contradiction. You renounce something and you enjoy that. Renunciation here means giving up attachment. If we can remove and give up attachment and live in this world, we can work hard, we can accumulate things. At the same time, we won't fall a prey, we won't become victims of diabetes, hypertension, anxiety, neurosis, and other problems, which always come in the company of success in material life. So in a way, this Upanishad is a direct interpretation of how we must live in this world. It apparently It is an Upanishad. The first statement is, the whole universe is pervaded by the Divine Spirit. The second verse says, so should we run away from this world? We need not run away from this world. We can live in this world. But while living in this world, while doing our duties and responsibilities, by going about our secular activities, at the back of the mind, we must keep this idea that these things are momentary. These things are not eternal realities. One psychologist says that most of the problems, anxieties, worries, tension, even many of the problems related to criminology are directly related to one serious misunderstanding that all people normally entertain their mind. When something happens, something tragic or undesirable, unpleasant happens, people lose their balance. They become hyper anxious. They become extremely worried. This extreme worry, anxiety, we feel because we think that problem is everlasting. Suppose banks collapse, we lose money. Well, suppose immediately we understand, well, money is not a permanent thing. Coming and going, momentariness is an inseparable aspect of everything in this relative world. So, we often forget the momentariness of relative, momentary entities. And we expect momentary or transitory, impermanent things to be permanent. So there is a conflict. We are facing a problem. At the moment of facing the problem, we somehow delude ourselves into thinking that there is a permanent problem. This idea of permanence of problems is responsible for anxiety, neurosis, depression, and the worries. If along with this experience we also remember, well, it is natural. Every problem is momentary. If money comes today and it goes tomorrow, again it may come back the next day. That's part of human life. So relativity, impermanence or momentariness is a part of everything in this empirical universe. If this idea could be kept in mind, then many of the problems can be avoided. In fact, that is the lesson originally taught by this Upanishad. The Upanishad says, this world as world, the world of names and forms, different things which come and go, which are momentary, are not permanent. But there is an immanent reality, a divine spark, which is omnipresent and immanent in this universe. That is the only everlasting reality. If we can keep this in our mind and focus our mind on that reality, on that truth, then we can live in this world and still be free from worldliness. Sri Ramakrishna, in a different context, says one should and one can live in this world without being within the world. One can live in this world without being within the world. He gives the beautiful imagery of crossing a river in a boat. Now, when you cross a river in a ferry or a boat, you should take care that the water doesn't enter the boat. If water enters the boat, then the boat will capsize. So, when we cross the river, we normally take care that the water doesn't enter the boat. If there is a hole, we will repair the boat. Similarly, the world is sometimes compared to a river. And life itself is the act of crossing the river. So one can live in this world and still one can live away from worldliness or worldly mindedness by keeping in our mind this idea that everything in this empirical world comes and goes. In fact, this was also the great lesson given by Buddha, which we discussed in the last Sunday lecture. Buddha's great message was this message of momentariness, or what's called Kshanabhangavada or Kshanigavada. He said, everything in this world is in a flux, momentary. All the problems, even the so-called sorrow and grief, are related to the mistaken idea that the problems are everlasting. But the moment we start looking upon these problems from a different angle, when we realize the momentariness of these undesirable, unpleasant experiences, then one can look upon them as a witness, which was later, this idea was developed by the second school of Buddhist idealism, which is known as subjective idealism, or called Vijnanavada or Yogacara, means a kind of subjective idealism. Means living in this world, but looking upon the empirical experiences through the prism of momentariness. That's the idea behind. So, once we fully get established in this, the Upanishad says, then you can live for 100 years. That's the literal meaning. Kurvanneha iha karmani jivishi shatam samah means 100 years. Be active. Work hard with sincerity, truthfulness and dharma. And then one can live in this world. In fact, this is a philosophy of life not for recluses, hermits, or those who are given exclusively to a life of contemplation. This is a philosophy of life meant for the common people living in this world, whether you are living in a factory or working in a factory, in a university, working in organic farms, or wherever it is. This is something which everyone can practice. Mind is the same for everyone. Problems are the same. Problems may differ not in kind but in degrees. So once we start looking upon the problem from a different angle, then problems are no more problems. Problems are only slight inconveniences which we can go beyond. That's the idea behind. So the Upanishad says, Kurvanneha iha karmani jijivishe shatam samaha. 100 years you live in this world and be active, but at the same time to avoid the water of worldliness from entering the boat of life, we must keep at the back of the mind the idea that everything other than this Atman, this divine, omnipresent, immanent, spiritual truth, everything else is momentary. There is only one reality that is permanent and eternal. So, that idea is put in a different language in the 7th verse. Here Lord Krishna says, once we purify our mind through sense control, by going beyond body consciousness, then we can purify our mind by devotion and also by unselfish performance of our duties and responsibilities. And this will help us to realize that we are something beyond the psychophysical mechanism. We are the Atman, the eternal self, the reality everywhere. But of course, in some of the commentaries on this Gita, modern interpreters like Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, Tilak and Gokhale, three great modern interpreters of Gita. Gandhiji explained Gita as a science of unselfish action, Anasakti Yoga. Aurobindo took a slightly different view. He interpreted Gita as a book that teaches the mystery of integral yoga, as he called. Integral yoga means one can go beyond the body, mind, intellect, consciousness and reach the supernatural state of integral yoga. And another great thinker, Tilak, he interpreted Gita exclusively as a science of karma yoga. He said that Gita teaches nothing but the science of unselfish action. Whatever may be, according to Tilak, Gita is a book of unselfish action. He makes a very interesting statement. He says, there are two conditions necessary for us to enter the path of yoga. And that is true for not only karma yoga, for any yoga, even any spiritual life. One is, we must be able to de-link. We must be able to break the chain that connects our mind with the result of what we are doing. Because normally, we don't do anything without thinking, without giving a thought to the result of our action. In fact, this connecting link is the main cause of all the problems. Anxiety is because of the worry whether the result of my action will be up to the expectation or it will be the opposite result. So somehow there's an invisible link between whatever we do with its immediate result. Here, action need not necessarily be physical action, intellectual action, mental thought, all this. We always try to relate what we do with its immediate result. And this relationship creates the bondage of attachment. And this chain, this bridge should be broken. That's the first step, not only in yoga as such, that's the first step in all spiritual life. And anybody who cannot break this chain cannot enter spiritual life. Can we just think somewhere and sit and think of something, a noble idea, a thought, which may not necessarily produce any beneficial result? Can we do something which we are sure is not going to produce a result that will benefit us somewhere or other, somehow or other? If we cannot do that, there is no spiritual life. So, in fact, this is a very difficult thing in a society which is work-oriented, which is result-oriented. It's very difficult. But Gita says the first condition in spiritual life is that one should make an effort to break this chain that ties what we do with the thought of what is going to happen to me as a result of this action. And the second important condition is, can we look upon our own body as something secondary, something relative? If we can't do that, then also spiritual life is an impossibility. In fact, all people try to do that. People want to forget their body. They want to forget their mind. People take to alcohol drinks to forget their mind and body. If there is a problem, they drink because they want to forget. They don't want to solve the problem. They want to live in a world of oblivion, total forgetfulness. It is not an attempt to solve the problem. It is an attempt to run away from problem. And running away will not solve the problem. So, everybody tries that. Great thinkers, great philosophers, great painters, great musicians, they all were trying to transcend body consciousness. And without going beyond body consciousness, no great work either in art, literature or history or philosophy is impossible. Think of any great musician, Beethoven, the Ninth Symphony. If a profligate, drunkard, genius like Dostoevsky, if he could not drink vodka and transcend body consciousness, he would not have been able to write a Grand Inquisitor. Great painters, great artists, they all tried to transcend body consciousness. But they were trying to do that. They were not really transcending. They were trying to transcend body consciousness by running away from body consciousness. But Gita says we must try to transcend through positive, creative, spiritual practices. So these are two important conditions in yoga. In fact, this is possible only for human beings. Means we have to fight against the instincts. It is a special privilege of human beings, the ability to go beyond body consciousness, to fight against the pull of the instincts. the ability to make an effort to speed up evolution. Vivekananda defines yoga in one context. He says yoga is the art of bringing man out of animal and bringing angel or God out of man. That's what he says. So, of course, he has given the same idea in 5 or 6 different statements, different for different languages. So he says, yoga enables to bring out the man from the animal and the God from the man, means human beings in that sense. It means it helps us to speed up evolution. Not at the physical level, for that chapter is over. We can't have any more evolution at the physical level, but evolution at a higher, different level. So, this is possible only by controlling the senses, by refining the mind, and by going beyond the feeling that I am this body or I am the psychophysical system. If we succeed in doing that, then Lord Krishna says, Sarva Bhudatma Bhudatma. Then we will realize that we are the Atman, the self within, the consciousness within, and the same consciousness is omnipresent. It is also immanent in everything, everybody. This is a very important principle that is brought out in a very graphic language in this 7th verse. Now, 8th, 9th, and 10th and 11th, these 3-4 verses give a very graphic description of how such a yogi lives in this world, works and performs his or her duties and responsibilities as a citizen, as a member of family or society, and so on. So, I shall first read the 11th verse, then come to the 8th verse. The 11th verse says, Kayena manasa buddhya kevalaihi indriyairapi yogina karma kurvanti sangam tektu atma shuddhaye. The psychology of a yogi in action is given here. Now what the yogi does? They perform their actions only with the body, mind, senses and intellect, forsaking attachment for the purification of heart. So a yogi realizes, as I said earlier, that he is something other than this body, mind and intellect. So when he realizes that he is something above and beyond the mind, body and intellect, when he can think of his mind, of his self beyond the mind, then he can work with this body. Kayena means body, mind, manasa means through mind. He can physically remain active. Mentally, intellectually he can remain active. But he'll be doing all these things not with much involvement. He may do much more efficiently than any hyperactive, worldly minded person doing his work with great attachment. In fact, people who do work with a lot of attachment, application, dedication and work ethic, they may do it very efficiently. The only difficulty is, along with that action, the mind gets hurt. Mind becomes bruised, weak. He loses his ability to remain in a state of tranquility and peace. When the mind is always worrying about the result, this worry, this anxiety, does a great harm, psychologically speaking, to the mind. A yogi does his duty and responsibility with the same application, with the same dedication, maybe greater application, greater dedication. At the same time, within his mind, he knows he is something beyond his mind and senses. He is the Atman. So, it's something like this. If we hold a stick in our hand, and if something hits the stick, we won't be hurt. So a yogi can look upon his own mind, his own intellect, his own senses of action and senses of perception as foreign entities. For him, Atman is his real nature. Everything other than Atman is a superimposition on this real nature. Just as somebody hits the stick that we are holding in our hand, can't hurt us. Similarly, they can look upon their own senses and mind. A yogi can do that with the full conviction that there are so many external instruments and tools in his hands. His true nature is Atman. So he says, with all these senses and mind and intellect, he is doing his duty. He can remain completely unattached. As I said earlier, the chain that binds his mind with the immediate result of his action is broken. So there is no anxiety. There is complete non-attachment. Once the chain is broken, one can perform, one can remain in a state of perfect poise, mental balance and tranquility, while at the same time being always involved in performing our duties and responsibilities. So we will have a few minutes for interaction, then we will conclude. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. If there is any topic for discussion, we'll be happy to do that.
How do you define attachment?
Well, attachment is the obsession with obsessive attachment. I often want to use the word obsessive. You do something and you get obsessed with the immediate expected result. That is attachment. Because if you use the word only attachment, if you look at the dictionary, sometimes attachment is a positive value. So attachment should be understood to be a kind of being obsessed with something. You do a work, and if the result is not up to the expectation, you get terribly disturbed. You get terribly broken up. That's because of your obsession with the desired result of action. Clear? Right. Obsession, disattachment enslaves you. Normal attachment may not enslave you. If mother is attached to her child, it is not a great bondage for her. It's a pleasure. So here, attachment means an enslaving mental feeling. But if I don't get the exact result that I'm going for, I'm all lost. That is the meaning of attachment here. That's true. That is true. It depends upon where we stand. If for normal people, non-attachment could mean total indifference, which could be a negative characteristic. In such cases, attachment is good. But if attachment becomes a terrifying and mentally enslaving feeling, you feel completely lost when the result is just below your expectation. People commit suicide when they don't get the expected grade in the university. That's what he meant here. It is not the attachment or affection of a mother for the child or the other way around. Something that enslaves you, that catches you by the throat and don't leave you. That is the implication of attachment here. In the Gita, Sanskrit commentaries, it makes very clear. So anything that makes you slave, that takes away your freedom. Psychological enslavement, it is called. It's not a very pleasant experience for anybody. Not very. We have a few more minutes, and we will have just one more class before the beginning of the summer recess. So next class, next Friday we will have class. So if you want to have any discussion, a few minutes, otherwise we'll conclude.
When we read an English translation, is it useful to
Yes, true, true. I heard there are many recordings of the verses, and if you keep with you a copy of the transliteration while listening to these recordings, it may be wonderful. In all classical spiritual literature, the sound and sense go together. If you detach the sense from the sound and go for the sense, the meaning only, literal meaning only, we may lose something. So it depends upon individual preferences and opportunities. So I shall give just one example and conclude. See, Upanishad says, Aham Brahmasmi, Sanskrit meaning, I am Brahman. Tattvamasi, you are that reality. Okay. Now what are these Upanishad statements? These statements have been used, meditated upon, contemplated upon for thousands of years by great saints who had this experience. So these words, they become very potent. They derive a great spiritual potency that may be true in any classical prayers. When a prayer or a hymn, for that matter, a song, is recited with great devotion by spiritually elevated souls, that sound mechanism, speech mechanism, derives a great potent force. And when you read it, a little of that will come to you also. That's how words, the sense of the words and sense go together. That's the meaning. So, Om, peace, peace, peace.